Glad to be with everybody today, and I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can still see me and also the PowerPoint. Um, I'm glad to be with you today, and I really am honored to be always in British Columbia. I live just about an hour south of the border in Warm Beach, Washington. Well, there's always more to learn. I'm always honored to be involved in things in BC because I see BC as a real leader in education. And I've been lucky to be part of the McConnell Well Ahead initiative, and I've gotten to know and consulted with districts like Delta and Vancouver, and I'm on the advisory board of HELP. So I have some understanding of BC and education, but lots to learn, and I hope I'll learn somewhat more today. So I'm going to talk about why the principal's role is key in nurturing school-wide or systemic SEL. I hope this is really useful to you, and I would love to have questions, of course. So good afternoon. I know it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon for you and for I, so I hope I'll keep this lively enough to keep you with me. I'm going to talk about a systemic model of social emotional learning, the issue of principal leadership, how do we become more systemic, how we care for ourselves and others, and probably a little bit about COVID and returning to school. And Kevin just let me know, I hadn't heard yet, that you're going to be returning to school around June 1st for the month of June. And I hope we can talk about that a bit. So I think there's some issues in a broad sense in creating caring schools. And I've been involved in social emotional learning for about 40 years. I'm one of the founders of CASEL. And the most important thing I think that we know is that both children and adults need good emotion regulation skills. And it's not just a problem for children, it's an issue for all of us. As Oscar Wilde once said, only the naive know themselves. And what he meant by that is I think that that learning how to regulate our emotions and our relationships is a lifelong journey for all of us. And we know that emotion skills are important. I actually published a paper showing that children's emotion regulation skills in kindergarten predicted their adult labor market outcomes, even when you control for their gender and their social class and the quality of their family, et cetera. And as you know, independent of kids' IQs, kids that have good emotion regulation skills don't end up in the principal's office. That's an important measure of the importance of emotion regulation. In addition, we need other things in schools. We need healthy norms and a safe environment for everyone. We need schools to adopt practices together that create a shared community of caring. And this can include high-quality SEL skills, service learning, maybe in high school, mindfulness practices, and all of this requires principal and administrative leadership. And it's taken me quite a long time, I'm a bit slow, to learn how important the qualities of a principal are in making all of this happen. And for the last 5 years or so, I've devoted myself to trying to spend a lot of time with principals and understanding their lives and their jobs. There is a survey done, you might have seen it, by CASEL in the United States, and so that may be a little different than Canadian findings, but this was a survey of 882 principals in the U.S. And what they said is that social emotional skills they believe are teachable in a school setting. 99% say probably or definitely teachable. And most principals say they're fairly committed to doing that. But only 33% of principals say they are really implementing school-wide. Most principals say they don't actually know exactly what that means. And only 25% of principals had met benchmarks for what we'd call high-quality implementation. There's just a more recent survey that was just done quite recently, and it showed pretty much the same thing again, but it also said that principals believe that teachers need evidence-based programs to implement in their classrooms, and when they don't have them, they struggle to create the kind of community they like in their schools. I have been involved with others in thinking about models of all of this, and this is a model called the Prosocial School, which was also just an article was just written in EdCan magazine on this. And if you start at the right-hand side, you see student social, emotional, and academic outcomes. And we believe that healthy school climate predicts those outcomes, and there's lots of good data to show that's the case. And we think healthy school climate is due to healthy principal-staff relations, a healthy organizational culture, and effective principal-community relationships. And that, we believe, is dependent on the principal's own social and emotional skills and their well-being. So there's no way of going around the idea that the principal's own well-being and their ability to lead in a social emotional way is important. And there are really two components here of what we call the prosocial school model. One is principals' own social and emotional competence and their ability to handle the enormous stress of being a principal and model caring and socially and culturally competent behaviors with their staffs and their students, parents, community agencies, etc. So it's really about the principal's own abilities. And of course, as I said earlier, as Oscar Wilde said, only the naive know themselves. All of us are always struggling to be the best we can and to improve our ability to work with others. The second component is what we'd call enhanced model of leadership, in which principals take on the leadership of social emotional learning in their schools to ensure that all staff, students, parents feel safe, cared for, respected, and valued. So the readiness and the role of school leader is important here. Principals, and I should say assistant principals, curriculum directors, assistant superintendents, etc. It's important for us to cultivate our own social emotional competence and really to be a lead learner. And then, of course, to elicit the involvement and the commitment of others. Surprisingly, as I've been involved in social emotional learning for about almost 40 years, I've noticed that principals have often been left out of this process, that teachers have received training. There are courses, lots of courses for teachers now. For example, Kim Schoen at Reichelt and others at UBC run master's level courses on SEL for teachers, but there's been very little developed regarding these ideas I've talked about so far about the principal as lead learner or principals exploring their own awareness. And of course, you have enormous demands. I think the principal's job is one of the most difficult and lonely and stressful jobs one can imagine. And these are just some of the demands that I think principals tell us that they feel. And I think the most important one sometimes is the one at the bottom right, which is no time for me. Many principals say that because of the 24/7 nature of the demands they feel, that their homeschool balance is way off, their workload is too high, and they're not taking care of themselves. And I'll come back to that as we proceed. But we want to get to systemic SEL. We want our whole school to be a place where children are learning the developmental skills of social emotional competence. The climate is one in which people feel respected and able to be culturally responsive to all kinds of kids, both in urban and rural settings. And that means that everywhere in the school, from the front office to the bathrooms, to the playground, everywhere should be infused with with social emotional skills, policies, and practices. Now, that's easy to talk about. It's not so easy to do. And I know that any principal that's even gotten halfway there has done a lot of work to do it. As Yogi Berra says, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. And that is, we can talk about theories like the prosocial theory or other theories of how all this works, but doing it is very different. And so we need to understand what are the right conditions for SEL to thrive in our schools. And I've been spending quite a lot of time in the last 20 years trying to study this, both in terms of the implementation of SEL programs, but also the broader issue of how principals can support school climate. SEL programs and good policies and practices will not grow and germinate in the wrong situation. Even though we can come and do training and support teachers to do new things, unless there is the right context, the right systems organizational changes, with principals really is the key factor, it's unlikely that schools will be able to maintain sustain quality practices. So the key issue is really the culture of relationships, and administrators really walking the talk. And as a person who's trained teachers on SEL programs in literally hundreds of schools, the best predictor of if this is going to work is, does the principal and the assistant principal show up to the training? And I know principals and assistant principals are very busy. But this is what's called walking the talk. That is, when principals and assistant principals are really involved with their staff together in learning these new ideas and thinking about how they become systems level and not just classroom level, that's when we can predict pretty well that things are going to work. So just like we have the prosocial school, one can think about the prosocial classroom, where we have student outcomes and a healthy classroom climate, which is due to teachers having good, healthy teacher-student relationships, good management skills, and effective implementation of whatever SEL they're doing. But that, of course, is determined by teachers' own social and emotional skills and well-being. And so for the past 15 years or so, I and others, my colleagues, have been developing and testing social and emotional programs, not for kids, but for teachers. I'll talk later about both calm and create, but we've been able to show that when teachers engage in their own social emotional learning and mindfulness, they enjoy their teaching more, they show less symptoms of depression, they sleep better, they enjoy their jobs more, and most importantly, when we observe them in the classrooms in randomized trials, they're more productive and their classrooms are more effective. So we know that even good teachers can improve more by becoming more self-aware. And I'll tell you, it's also true for administrators. So in the classroom, when we think about SEL, we think about a three-legged stool, and this comes from CASEL. We want a supportive classroom environment. We want to integrate SEL and the rest of instruction, but we also need explicit instruction in SEL skills, especially in the early years, that is in the elementary years. But even in middle and high school, we see children's abilities, youth's abilities to learn new skills, especially around relationships, especially around dating and drug and alcohol use, service learning, actions around democracy. There are new explicit skills to learn at every developmental period. And what we've learned from both research and practice is that across many evidence-based programs, fidelity matters. If we do these programs relatively well, which means teachers receive good training and ongoing consultation, then these programs lead to positive outcomes. And the more high fidelity the results are, and the more careful attention we pay to how well they're implemented, the more likely it is that we see improvements in children's social emotional development, their attention, their engagement in the classroom, and their academic achievement test scores. So how do we become more systemic in our thinking? We know from, you've probably heard about the SEL meta-analyses that on average, high quality, well-implemented SEL programs lead to about 11% improvement in achievement test scores. So how do we become more systemic in our thinking? This is the task that I think we all have, and we're all learning as we go. I was in Coquitlam about 3 or 4 years ago, and my wife was doing a workshop, and I found this on the wall. And I don't know if anybody on the call today is from Coquitlam, but this is an example of trying to think deeply about what are the guiding principles of a district, what does it mean to have mindfulness leadership development, what kinds of instructional leadership and training, how do we make this coherent across the school and the district. But this kind of thinking is really important. And CASEL, of course, has been thinking this way for a long time, and we have a theory of action where we establish a shared vision as a community, a school or a district. We assess our resources and needs. We embed high-quality professional development, especially around the adults. As one superintendent said to me once in the bathroom, he said, the problem in my district is not my students. It's me and the staff. We are the ones that are holding back kids from feeling respected and cared for, and it's our work that is most important. Adopting evidence-based programs, as I'm talking about today, integrating SEL school-wide, using using data for continuous improvement, and communicating well with outside community agencies, parents, etc. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but CASEL has an online school guide, which is a guide that helps schools to think systemically. It includes creating an SEL team, and it has a very detailed set of procedures, worksheets, and activities for schools. Often schools will need coaching to use this effectively. I know I've talked to some VC districts that have found doing it by themselves is a bit hard, and I think requires some consultation, but it's a great guide, and I'd recommend that any of you that are interested in becoming more school-wide in your SEL, refer to this guide on the CASEL website. CASEL's talked about 10 indicators of school-wide SEL, and I don't mean to bore you with 10 things here, but these are things that we can think about. CASEL has rubrics where you can go from we haven't even started, we've begun, we're partway there till we've completed it. And these are things like explicit SEL instruction in classrooms, integrating SEL into the rest of the curriculum, having supportive classroom climates, working on the issue of youth voice and engagement, focusing on adult SEL and relationships, most of my topic today, having supportive discipline strategies, creating a continuum of integrated supports, having a system for continuous improvement using data, and having authentic family and community partnerships. Now, you may say that you're farther on some of these than others, and one of the strategic things as a principal to think about is what's most important for us right now in our school, given where we're at. And so going through and doing a rubric where you see where you're at on each of these can be very helpful in as a first step in deciding what might set as priorities for the next school year. So what do we know? We know that high quality SEL programs exist. I won't bore you with going through more of this. You can find this in the CASEL guide, the PrevNet guide in Ontario. We know that programs need to be integrated. Programs alone are not a school-wide process. They need to be integrated with policies and practices. They need to be tailored to each particular school. But when they're done well and they're integrated with policies and practices that support teachers, families, and become coordinated with out-of-school programs, that's when we're getting to the issue of systemic change. And this requires both policy change and in BC, you've gone through quite a bit of it. The highlighting of social responsibility as a key component of education really puts BC in, I think, a unique position for real change. The ministry and the Help Center have been focused on systemic change and using systems thinking. These are great next steps in the process of really building that kind of infrastructural development and policy change that can really lead to the kind of systemic SEL that we're all hoping for. I'm the chair of the board of a nonprofit organization called CREATE, Creating Resilience for Educators, Administrators, and Teachers. And our goal has been to develop and carefully test programs that will support teachers and administrators' well-being. And I'd like to take a fair amount of time for questions today, so I'm only going to briefly tell you a little bit about what we've been doing here. But I'll start with a quote from the Principled magazine, David DeRosa. He said, "Supporting the diverse needs of others is the work I signed on for, but without a strategy to monitor and reset myself to a baseline over the long haul, it's not sustainable." And I'm sure many of you often feel that your job is not sustainable. David's strategy was more likely to keep moving faster, as the action of engaging in the work was easier than the development of new strategies to sustain myself. Now, David says, "Today I give myself permission to breathe in the rhythms of the day and the work with the goal of sustaining relationships and sustaining myself. I also apply systems thinking tools when I'm working with my complex responsibilities." And that's the kind of work that we have been doing with teachers to help them sustain themselves. And more recently, we've been doing it with administrators. And in fact, we did quite a lot of work about 2 or 3 years ago with Maple Valley Pitts Meadow administrators. And I think they see that as central to their systems change work. We've done previous studies with administrators. Actually, they've been done in a number of places in Pennsylvania and in Canada, et cetera. And what we found is that when administrators go through the CARE program, they show improved leadership skills because they become more self-reflective. They think more deeply about their relationships and also about their own care. We just did a project of administrators and district level educators, that is principals, assistant principals, assistant superintendents in an urban district in Pennsylvania. And you can see they were primarily white, about half female, and in their 40s, mostly school leaders. And a baseline, 41% of the administrators screened positive for risk for anxiety. 25% screened positive for risk for depression. And a lot of them just said they just don't do a good job of taking care of themselves. There's no time. And this is what I often hear repeatedly from principals, the feeling of being overwhelmed. Of course, there are lots of impacts of stress, they told us, at work. Increased feelings of anxiety, loss of passion for their work, poor eating habits, not taking care of themselves. Only 19% of people said stress did not affect their work. And of course, that carries into the home environment. Trouble sleeping, ruminating about the issues at work, concern and worry about others, lack of energy, and just feeling emotionally drained. We did 3 days of care training with these administrators, and afterwards, in their feedback survey results, about 80% of them said they were satisfied. Some of them like smaller groups, but overall they were highly satisfied with this kind of training, which is really not about curriculum. It's really about their own development. And about 70% said they'd recommend it to colleagues, and that this type of training should be integrated into pre-service training for administrators. And I know I've looked at the pre-service training that's done in both the US and Canada, and there's very little preparation to support principals to really deepen their own understanding of themselves and what it means to be a social emotional leader. In the survey, as you can see, most administrators said they became more self-aware. They were better able to manage their behavior effectively and compassionately, to promote awareness and concentration, to improve their well-being, and to use these care ideas in both their life and their work. So what I'm presenting to you, I think, is a holistic picture where we want to support effective social and academic development and well-being. And there's a number of things we need to create these kind of healthy, caring schools that I hope many of you are striving for and maybe reaching. One is we need effective conditions for learning and norms of caring. The second is we need good social and emotional skill development for our students. And lastly, we need principal and teacher well-being and awareness, so that principals are living and working in a context in which people feel well-being, they feel they're part of a community that's moving forward, and everyone that comes into the building feels cared for, respected, and, if I can use the word, loved. So I've been talking to many audiences about returning to school and COVID-19. I know in BC you've done an incredible job of managing the COVID process. I know Bonnie is a hero in your province, and you've gotten really strong leadership, and the rates have been very low. And you're returning to school soon. And I think that many teachers, I'm sure yourselves, and parents are feeling stressed, anxious, and worried, even in spite of the fact that your rates of infections have been low. We've been thinking about this a lot. CASEL has just released a guide, which you can find on the CASEL website, which is on returning to school, and I hope you'd find that helpful. I'm sorry I didn't think to put it in the chat today, but I'll send the information to Kevin and he can forward it to you if you haven't seen it. And we've been thinking about this. We've been developing a workshop called Rebuilding Community. It's an interactive workshop focusing on teachers' own social emotional learning, what kind of strategies they've used for themselves. And in the morning of this day, we're going to focus mostly on teachers and what they have done, how they've coped, and how that has helped them or maybe not helped them. And in the afternoon, we talk about rebuilding the community of our classrooms and also our whole school. What kinds of strategies can we as a school come up with to create whole school wellness? And in the next couple of months, we'll be providing online training in this one-day curriculum in a train-the-trainer model for leaders, SEL staff, psychologists, lead teachers, counselors, etc. Because we think that when schools come back together, we're going to need to take some time to really honor and recognize what what people have been through, even in British Columbia, as a way of resetting the process of starting to build community again. Administrators are going to need to spend some time just making sure people understand what the new rules will be, even the safety rules, so that people will feel like they're all on the same page. But I think the most important thing is to recognize that we've all been through a lot. And, I don't want to overplay this, but there's a sense in which when we hear of the trauma and the tragedies, and we all hear them almost every day on the news, even though we necessarily haven't been directly affected, there's a sense of our own impending doom in this process. And I would need to say, I think that pretty much everyone has been traumatized, even people that have not had COVID, have not had any relatives or close friends that have been hospitalized or died, that all of us have been really traumatized by this. And therefore, I think the first thing is not to get to business. It's to really give some time to staff to recognize what a hard time this has been, and to have some time for people to talk about the things that they've experienced, how they've coped and what's worked for them, and really recognizing the personhood of each staff member, from the bus drivers to the cafeteria staff to the school support staff, as well as the teachers, and really to let everyone talk a little bit and recognize that they're all being seen for the experiences they've had. Now, that's the first part of it, I think. I think a second part of it is the fact that many kids have been traumatized. And this may, again, not be because they have a family member or someone who's been very ill, but because they've been home in environments where they haven't felt a lot of support, and where, as you know, many parents have been pulling their hair out in this process and may have lost control at times. And it's very important that, and I don't need to say this because you know it already, that the children see schools as a very safe place, as a place where they're loved, cared for. It's a place, a haven of safety. And so I think it's important for teachers and the staff together to think about, what does it mean to make this school a haven of safety now? And every school may come up with somewhat different ideas. Of course, I would say that starting with some good SEL, where children, just like adults, can recognize how they've been feeling, what they've done when they weren't feeling well, and what worked and what didn't work, so they can learn about themselves and others. All is an important part of this process. And unless we attend to these social and emotional issues, and that also means tier 2, tier 3 work with counselors for kids that need extra work, we'd be moving too fast, and I think it'll backfire. Let me use the word compassion right now. I think that creating a compassionate context on return is really important, and that means that when we're compassionate, not only are we thinking about the feelings of others, think about, very simple, the golden rule, if you will, and putting ourselves in the place of others, but recognizing that not only can we feel the experience of others, but we can begin to take very small actions often to be compassionate to each other. And these are not big things necessarily. These are things like the way we treat each other on a daily basis, the ability to reach out to parents who are concerned and have a phone call with them, to stay in regular contact with them. And what we know is that when children feel, or adults or anyone feels loved, they feel more secure. And when they feel more secure, they're more likely to pay attention and explore. And if we want children to really engage, as we all know as teachers, the most important and difficult thing is to recruit the attention of 25 or 30 kids at the same time. And when we can recruit their attention and we really can engage them, that's when learning happens. And so the ability for children to feel secure, which allows them to really engage their attention, is critical for the next stage of learning. So love can be translated into the ability to help children feel that there's a secure, safe place for them, a place where they can be themselves. And this may lead to even some acting out in the first weeks, because kids just haven't seen each other. They've been cooped up. And we have to sort of loosen our expectations for, I think, how much time we can engage them in deep learning, and allow more time for them to become more acquainted again with each other and with the idea of the classroom being a family that's a loving context. Of course, there are many different ways people care, but all of them require that they give some time to themselves. And so trying to figure out, and this is not easy when you have a family at home, of course, in addition, to give yourself time each day, a number of times each day, where you can do something. You can take a walk. You can exercise in a vigorous way. Some people meditate, but most don't. And I'm not advocating that as the solution. You can just have a drink with a friend, right? You can find times where you can just diffuse from the pressure that you feel, what you call the leader guilt. And I think the second thing is you're going to have to set priorities. And many of you already know this. This is not new. But you have to figure out what's most important right now. What's most important? And I would say to you, what's most important is not the pressure from supervisors around learning. It's creating this kind of caring community when you rebuild. And it's helping support families that are very anxious about sending their kids, and recognizing why people are anxious, and not denying it, not trying to just convince parents that everything's okay. Because telling people everything's okay when they don't feel that way doesn't help them very much. Instead, recognizing that they're worried and concerned, and that's legitimate, I think is a more effective way of helping parents to feel trust in the school. Now, as far as supervisors go, I know that there's a principal gap in British Columbia, administrator gap, in that more principals have been on administrative leave than ever before. We have, just like in the US, we have enormous attrition of principals. And all I can say is that if supervisors don't see what's happening here, and they don't understand the value of supporting principals' own personal development so that they become better at their job and they enjoy it more, then we're in a really bad situation. And this is something that really requires that superintendents take a broader view of what it means to develop the administrative staff of their districts. And I know there are labor management issues, there are many, many issues, but I really believe that principals, vice principals, and assistant principals and administrators have not received the attention they need, both in terms of their own self-care and in terms of really learning what it means to create these kinds of healthy schools. Many principals I talk to really don't understand social emotional learning, and they really don't know how to get to the next step. And recently, I've just worked with a group of superintendents and principals in Pennsylvania to develop a course just for principals in SEL. It's the first part of a 3-course sequence. The first one we think is really about what is SEL. It's an embedded work course in which the principals or assistant principals or superintendents need to investigate what's going on in their district. They need to understand what it means to implement programs. They need to assess their programs' implementation quality. The second course is really about the principal's own development, the kind of work I mentioned with CARE. And the last course is how to put this all together into systemic change. And when I look at the kind of training and ongoing support that principals get, I don't see that anywhere. And I think that there's a need for principals to advocate for themselves, to have trainings that really help them be as competent as they can in this social, emotional, or what I call prosocial school leadership. And I would encourage all of you to work with the association to create more of this kind of training, because we're having many principals are retiring in the next 10 years, and we really need to think about what it means to train new principals to take on this very difficult and confusing job and to do it in a way that is as caring and considerate and compassionate as can be.